and welcome to Freedom Fighters Code Gray. This is a show where we discuss human trafficking, an issue that's happening across Canada and in our own backyard. If you are in a situation of trafficking, or if you're looking for information and support related to human trafficking, you can call the Human Trafficking National Hotline at 1-833-900-1010. Again, that's 1-833-900-1010, and this service is available 24/7. Today, I'm joined by Krystal Snider from Collaborative Community Solutions to discuss the work that she's doing in the community to foster collaboration, to disrupt systems, and to help make support systems more accessible for individuals who are exiting situations of trafficking. So, Krystal, welcome for joining us on the show today, and I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to learn from you today.
Thanks. It's so great to be here. And I think that this will be reciprocal learning. You have your own set of knowledge and skills. So just really grateful to be here.
Well, thanks, Krystal. I'm wondering if you can take some time to share with us, what is the organization that you work for? What is collaborative community services, rather, and how did it begin?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the question. So Collaborative Community Solutions, which is a mouthful. As a side note, we're in a strategy planning session where a rename will come. So we're a training and consulting firm based in the Niagara region. And although we're based here, a lot of the work is remote, a lot of the administrative work and a lot of training happens kind of across Canada or in other parts of Ontario. So we're based here, but we serve the entire country and do a little bit of global work. So we're really centered on supporting agencies or communities to design their anti-trafficking responses, to incorporate lived experience lens. I'm a big fan of policies, so I support policy development to provide clarity to staff who are intervening. And we work with agencies and communities. So I don't do a lot of individual work, although sometimes maybe a family member, a survivor calls me. I don't do kind of that direct service, but rather try to help agencies and communities create their own experts for larger impacts.
That's incredible. And how did your organization start? Like, what kind of gave you the impetus to be like, this is a need in the community? This is an area of anti-trafficking work where there's a gap, and we want to, see pathways being built between these organizations to bring the expertise in.
Yeah, great question. So I worked in the Niagara region for pretty much my whole career. I spent about 10 years in the women's gender-based violence sector, nonprofits mostly. So I worked for early in my career, worked for the Sexual Assault Center, and I used to support folks who would come into hospital after an assault and be the very practical emotional support while they were getting cared for by the sexual assault nurses. So that was early in my career, and then I moved into housing and homelessness. So I worked for the YWCA for just about 10 years and worked kind of a variety of different roles. And so both in the Sexual Assault Center and through the YWCA was seeing a lot of gaps in supports for clients who are traditionally labeled as out of our scope of service. So very complex, very, very shoved to the margins of society, often high levels of addiction. I ran some drop-ins for women who worked in survival sex work. And so I noticed kind of this gap, and we started to have conversations about human trafficking. It's still a fairly new conversation in Canada. And so I was able to mobilize through the YWCA Niagara's response to human trafficking and secure some funding for the Safer House that they opened, I think, 2020. And I was working there. I was director of policy and advocacy. It was the height of the pandemic. I was overseeing 3 emergency shelters and other programs. And I just thought, I'm going to quit my very secure full-time job with 2 kids at home in the height of a pandemic and start a company, because why not? And so that's what I did. I think I just had noticed I had started to do work outside of the region. And I really noticed a need for collaborative engagement. And trafficking in general is such a interpersonal relational crime the solutions are also very interpersonal and relational. So I thought, I think maybe this is a niche I can fill. I'm also a survivor of domestic sex trafficking, other forms of gender-based violence, and labor trafficking. So I think what's unique about the company that I run is we bring this experience, like I bring these different layers of experience to enhance the work that communities are doing.
Thank you for taking the time to reflect and share that story with me. You have been working in various nonprofit areas to help individuals who are impacted by various levels of oppression and to support them, whether it's on the front line or in housing, and then now through the different policy advocacy work that you're doing. And it's really neat to hear about your journey in those areas. And as your website shares and some of the work that you do, you, in your current role, and correct me if I'm wrong, focus more on a systems approach to addressing human trafficking rather than, fixating and examining the root causes. And so I would love if you could take some time to just expand more in depth on why is that important and why is your organization addressing human trafficking from a systems approach? What does that mean? First of all, what does that mean? And why is that significant?
For sure. So I would say we actually do the reverse. So we address from root causes rather than systems. And so I think that when I think of a systems approach and I think about the work that I've done in various agencies prior to opening the company, there are these large systems and structures that are funded to provide support and funded to provide help. But because they are top-down systems, they're very hierarchical. They tend to be patriarchal in how they operate. There are some very, very real barriers because of funding asks, because of governance. There's all these very real things that influence right on the front line how the work is done and how it's shown up. For these folks who are often labeled as like outside of the scope, they're just not able to access the support that they really need, and their needs are not informing up. So when I think about root causes, and I think about in leadership, we call it like an inverted pyramid style of leadership, where it really should be the people that we are wanting to serve who are influencing and informing all levels of design of an agency in the work. So I think there was that very important distinction that I wanted to look at. I think also nonprofits are limited because of a bunch of barriers that they have in terms of their funding and what they're allowed to do with it. Whereas when you're a private company, you have some different freedom and structures and how to respond and support. I have a client of mine who does this most beautiful work in the North, and I one time said, like, we need to burn these structures down. That statement of like, the structures are creating the violence, let's burn them down. And she said, why waste our energy doing that? We'll build something new. And I thought that was such a great way to divert kind of that conversation. Structures aren't meaning to do harm, but they are in fact doing harm. And so if we can flip how that work is being done, we can reduce the harm.
That was such a helpful explanation to understand how different dynamics of power are at play within, the hierarchy of organizations, and how that impacts, and in particular, the words that you described, like, creates another form of violence against the individuals who are seeking support and who are seeking help. And so along the same lines, I'm wondering if you could highlight a little bit about how these structural barriers that you see existing in the nonprofit sector or in different institutions actually impact the individuals who are facing various kinds of injustice, and how does that really result in a barrier from them accessing support?
Yeah, so I think I'll use my time in housing and homelessness as an example. We know that a lot of survivors of human trafficking also have substance use issues as a result of coping with their trauma, right? And a lot of emergency shelters or programs in general, although they may be harm reduction, meaning that you don't necessarily discharge for use, or that they know that you're using, but you can't bring supplies in. The reality for survivors fleeing trafficking is that like substance use is a big part of our existence in terms of how we need to operate as we're learning to heal. And so if I present to an emergency shelter that has a no use or no safe use spot, and that's not available to me, one, that's a barrier to exit. I might just return because I know what power I have somewhere else. And sometimes it's also a real consideration for danger. A lot of, particularly in sex trafficking, you're not dosed. You're not dosing yourself. You're dosed by a trafficker. So when you leave and engage in substance use, you are at high risk for overdose because you're not really sure what the dose is that you have a tolerance to. And so it's not as simple as just incorporating, wet shelters. It's definitely far more layered, but it is that kind of those policies that create some barriers, as well as a lot of places have curfews. A lot of places make you turn in your medication. Like, to me, that felt like, for me in trafficking, I had more freedom than I might have in a service because it's so restrictive.
Thank you for highlighting those examples of how you're seeing almost like the surveillance of individuals through these institutions, whether it's the regulation of substances that they are using, or time in and out of a space, or details of their personal life like medications, and the importance of having spaces where people feel free and safe to heal in the ways that they need in their respective journeys. And so as we close the segment of the show, I am just wondering if you could briefly highlight if you think that human trafficking is a form of gender-based violence. You've talked about being involved in gender-based violence work before. And so just as we look to continuing our conversation later, I was just wondering if you could share if you think it is, and if yes, why?
Yeah, so I think what I'm actually learning is that gender-based violence can be an intersection of human trafficking, that human trafficking in and of itself is not exclusively a gender-based violence issue, although there is absolutely an intersection there. The danger in making it exclusively a gender-based violence issue is conflating the needs of maybe an intimate partner violence survivor and those who are trafficked, as well as leaving a lot of other things out of the discussion. So although I think it's an intersection, absolutely, it's not exclusively a gender-based violence issue.
That is such a great point to highlight. I think sometimes we can just look at a topic or an issue that's happening in the community and say that it must be labeled as X. And to identify that there are intersecting concepts that we need to think about when understanding human trafficking is really important, because it is an interdisciplinary issue. So, Krystal, I have just already learned so much from you in the short time we've had together, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation after we take a short break.
Public transit, garbage pickup, parks and recreation programs, snow removal on your street. How can you stay informed about these and other important local services? Tune to City Council coverage on Rogers TV. See your community leaders at work on Rogers TV City Council coverage.
We're taking this global.
The toughest competition in sports is back. With the most international group of warriors ever. 16 mixed martial artists from 14 countries face off.
I don't care how light it is.
You're fighting each other for what?
For a shot at UFC glory. And women's flyweight champion Alexa Grasso and former champion Valentina Shevchenko guiding them on their quest. It's the new season of The Ultimate Fighter.
Yes!
Unbelievable.
You're watching an interesting local show on Rogers TV and you want to know more. That's when you head to rogerstv.com. Our website provides more information about our programs, our hosts, our schedule, and about how you too can get involved with Rogers TV. Visit us online at rogerstv.com.
Hi, and welcome back to Freedom Fighters Code Gray. This is a show where we discuss human trafficking. In today's episode, I am joined by expert Krystal Snider, who is sharing her knowledge as the executive disruptor of Collaborative Community Solutions. And so as we start the segment of the show, Krystal, I would love for you to share a bit about collaboration. What does collaboration mean to you, and what is the value and importance of it as we look at addressing human trafficking specifically?
Yeah, so I think, like I talked about it a bit in that it's interpersonal and it's relational, right? So we do have these tables and we have coalitions across the province, and they're effective in terms of the work that they're trying to achieve. But certainly for me as a survivor who like mobilized a collective, it was relational. And like folks, folks who are trying to exit, they need to feel safe and they need to feel like you know the person that you're getting referred to. So for me now, how that looks, it looks a variety of ways in terms of leaning into those relationships that people already have or communities already have and trying to enhance them through this trafficking lens. I think of one example, I work with a school board in Haldimand County, so Grand Erie School Board, and they've designed a model for kids who are identified as either at risk of being trafficked or at risk of being traffickers or have been trafficked. They've collaborated with a local Indigenous community for a program that brings folks back to the land. And they use alternative models of education, such as, you know, getting somebody a gym membership if that's what they need to regulate, or getting somebody access to art if that's what they need to regulate. And then they offer credits, high school credits, in order for folks to achieve, you know, their high school. And so I think that isn't run by, you know, any one person, but there's these collectives of partnerships they've made in community outside of traditional partnerships that are enhancing healing and growth for these youth to be able to complete. And so yeah, that would be a good example of collaboration.
What I love about what you just highlighted there is you're kind of demonstrating how each person has unique needs. And so when you have a relational approach, they can help provide for those various needs. So as you mentioned, the youth who might want to go to the gym or go to art, right? Like these are different areas of support that require different organizations or different staff members or community members to be a part of a collaborative solution. And so in reference to the work specifically that you do, how do you see yourself as a person who fosters collaboration in their work? What does that look for you on the day-to-day?
So for me, I'm really just about like introduction. So I'm so grateful through this journey that I've met a variety of people with really cool skills doing really great work. And so I'm not a fan of like recreating the wheel. I'm not a fan of wasting resources by recreating the wheel. So my job always is just to bring folks together. And if I have a relationship that could enhance the work that's going on, I find I will add that or introduce people. So, and I model it. I think that's really how I try to do my work. So if I'm asked to come in and do a training with a community that maybe I'm not part of, or that I'm not familiar with, then I co-facilitate with somebody and co-develop the presentation with somebody who is part of that community. So I try to model it as best as I can.
That's wonderful. I appreciate how you broke that down, because sometimes people hear these words like collaboration and they're wondering, well, what does that exactly mean? And you highlighting that it's personal. It's making an introduction when you know someone that can make a connection or that could work together well, and trying to bridge those different areas of silos, right? Like someone might be working in a silo, and then that bridge that's being built will help them achieve various goals together. As you look ahead to the future, what are some of the goals that you have for your organization, or maybe projects underway that you're really excited about?
Yeah, so again, I'm in a strategy planning, which is amazing. It's a new skill for me as a business owner. I've done nonprofit strategy, but this is different. So kind of dreaming that up right now in terms of what life will look like. My goal has always been for this company to be the like hub of feminist consultants. So that if somebody, because there's a huge gap, a lot of nonprofits, particularly women serving nonprofits, need consultants, hire consultants, but they're missing the nuances that maybe happen in a feminist agency or in a women's agency. And so my goal is to have these collectives of people that I know who are amazingly skilled, and they become consultants through the company. And so that's like my long-term big goal. In terms of projects coming up, A lot of my projects right now are just continuations, which is super exciting. I work with women at the center who just completed ethics approved research with survivors across Canada. That was all peer-based. So that report will be released at the end of this month. And it's really, really impactful in terms of the intersections of traumatic brain injury and survivors of human trafficking. So that's really, important work that's coming out. And then we got an extension. I'll continue to work with the school board. And I'm working in the north in Treaty 3 on really trying to anchor into a model of housing for Indigenous youth who are transitioning out of care. So that's been in the works for some time. And we're writing right now the strategy for all friendship centers in Ontario to respond to human trafficking and to make it a priority. And then most exciting is I'm heading to Kenya in the fall with Survivor Alliance. They're a survivor-led agency out of the UK. They're doing their World Congress of Survivors. So 100 survivors are gathering, and I'll be able to present Women at the Center's research there. So that's probably the most exciting thing.
Oh my goodness, you have so many various plates in the air, so many incredibly impactful projects that you are a part of, from research mobilization to housing to strategic planning, to getting people together then to go and present this research in Kenya. That is a wonderful opportunity, and I look forward to hearing more about that. There's something that you said at the beginning of that last response, talking about getting folks who have perhaps a feminist perspective on addressing this issue together. For folks tuning in today, what does that mean in terms of, what does feminism and a feminist approach to addressing human trafficking entail? And why do you think it's important to build or to mobilize these collective hubs of folks who are addressing the issue from that lens?
For sure. So I'm going to be specific to sex trafficking here, although that's not exclusively what I talk about. I mean, in this field, in these conversations that we've been having for almost 15 years now around human trafficking, in feminism, and I think in the feminist movement, there has always been, but it's definitely highlighted here, quite a polarized view around sex work and sex trafficking. So you may have agencies that are abolitionist based, meaning all sex work for them is exploitive. That's the angle that they take, and that's the support that they offer. Then you have folks in the sex worker rights movement who, for them, they don't experience it as exploitation. If there's exploitation that happens, it might be seen as labor exploitation rather than sexual exploitation or human trafficking. So what I actually think is quite beautiful right now in this movement is we're starting to see those two sides have conversations together. Early on in my career, I have seen really emotionally charged conversations about this that have led into a place for non-safety, I think, for both folks on both ends of the spectrum. And so what's quite beautiful right now is that folks are having that conversation, and the lens is changing more towards however you as the survivor identify yourself. And I think that is a beautiful thing. I continue to, and I called for when I was testifying to the status of women as they were reviewing the strategy and the trafficking laws, the prostitution laws, I called for the government to create pathways for these conversations to intentionally happen, because I really don't think it's a good idea to proceed with changing these legislations without a conversation between the two sides impacted and those on the peripheral, right? So when I think about feminists and feminist agencies in the context of sex trafficking, I do think about that polarizing issue, because it keeps people silent, or it keeps people distracted sometimes. And so, although that's not exclusively what the work looks like, that's just a point I really thought was important to share.
I am really grateful that you shared that call to action with the government, and I do hope that they implement that, because that discourse, like you said, can distract folks from finding ways to collaborate together, right? People might have different perspectives when coming to look at the sex industry as a whole, but that there are different ways that folks can still work together to support individuals with various things that they might need on their healing journey, or to assist them in various ways that they might be interpreting and experiencing violence. And so I think that that call to action for pathways to be built is so important. And I do hope to see that come into fruition. What do you think, like for the general public who's out there, maybe someone who's never heard anything about human trafficking before and they're tuning into our conversations today, what do you feel is like really important for them to know about this topic? And also the work you do, what do you want people to know about what you're up to?
I think in the discourse of human trafficking and anti-trafficking work, there's a lot of moral panic that happens, meaning like we're fed information and then everything is terrifying. And how do we not stay in being terrified, but be informed, particularly as parents? I have a 17-year-old daughter and myself and a 12-year-old son, so I can appreciate it. I think what I am often trying to tell folks is that although trafficking can happen to anybody, we know that there are communities that are particularly targeted. They're targeted for a multitude of reasons, but fundamentally there's a disconnect. And as a parent and as a community member, and somebody doing this work, the best protection mechanism against human trafficking is connection to each other. The more and more that we can be connected to the humans in our lives in meaningful ways, the more we're protecting each other. Human trafficking really is a symptom of inequity. Although there are varying dynamics that take place, it fosters because of inequity. And so the more we can look at those root causes and meet the needs that people have that are preyed upon, we'll see a reduction in trafficking. So I think that would be the most powerful thing for me to share with folks, is like, stay connected to your humans. And when you notice something isn't right, check in with people. Just check in.
So profound, Krystal, both the importance of connection and helping people remember that to offer connection to those that are in their community, but also maybe people that they don't know, right? Some people want to be looked at in the eye and said hello to. They might not have had that happen in a while, or what's your name? And going back to the importance of seeing the value of people, all people with dignity and worth. And also something you said earlier in the show about creating something new. And I think through building those connections, right, there is opportunity for people to flourish and to work together to think about what a new future could look like apart from violence and apart from trafficking in our world. So Krystal, it has been just such an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today and to learn from you. You have so much knowledge in this area, so I'm really grateful for the time that you've taken to share about the inspiring work that you're doing through your organization, but also just as an individual and as a person and as a human. It's been just really great to speak with you today. If you are tuning into the show and you are in need of support or information related to human trafficking, you can call the Canadian National Human Trafficking Hotline 24/7 at 1-833-900-1010. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in today's episode. We hope that you'll catch us next time on Freedom Fighters Code Grey.